Do people who inherit wealth from their parents deserve it? That's a question that's been raised many times throughout the last few decades, and especially it's more so significant as the inequality gap grows. It's more of a class warfare issue now, where people at the bottom are more likely to feel envious or even bitter hatred towards those who seemingly don't deserve wealth. But is this true, and how should we look at this as a society, and how do we make this actually a viable debate to be having? So here in this video, we look to explain not only this, but the general question of what do we owe to future humans? So you'll find that this is actually a perspective issue, as we'll get into very soon. But to fully understand this, we're going to have to go through a few definitions and some frameworks to actually understand how this might be the case. So to introduce the first idea is that currently there's a trend going on with anti-nepotism. So what does this mean? Anti-nepotism, anti-inheritance. So this is a bitterness towards people who have wealth, who didn't earn it, or seemingly have inherited it without any virtue themselves. So these would be people who take over companies from their wealthy fathers, grandfathers, mothers, grandmothers, right? And these are people who seemingly don't deserve it because they were simply born into richness. And this seems unfair. I mean, of course, these people didn't choose to be born into a rich family. That's just how it works. But it seems unfair because these people seemingly get these wealth and riches that many of us aren't able to get. And it is really a class issue because this is one of the greatest times of inequality, given so much prosperity in the world. So this idea I've came up with was done last year, and is one of the original documents that I've created throughout this time. So first, I'd like to begin by defining what property is. So for those of you who can't watch but are listening, property is a noun which, the first definition, is a quality or trait belonging, and especially peculiar, to an individual or thing. So I want to make that clear. So the big word, important word here is individual. That's what makes this interesting, because the contemporary definition of property today is that something individual can own, right? Not an entity, an individual. And that reflects how we see ourselves today. We are all individuals. We are, of course, this does contribute to some level of atomization, but a lot is good. A lot of liberty is gained by the fact that we are individuals and we can command our own property. Property is not, of course, uniquely Western, but it's been extremely relevant because of the way we actually have started to interact with capital in the 14th century, 13th century, when markets truly began to flourish in the pre-Renaissance era. And what this has done is property it's a concept ultimately, right? It's a concept that we use in the Western or modern world, really, that lets us work with money and things and ownership and have houses that we can uniquely call our own, but defend it for ourselves. But it's not always been a thing that's been consistent throughout human history. Famously, the Native American societies, I believe I can't quite remember their name, but the mound builders, right? These were more collectivist societies where, of course, you had a house that you lived in uniquely and that you, of course, worked, but the way society was conducted was much more collective. That property was something that the society itself, the community itself, owned as a collective, right? It would be an us versus them as an entity, but not as an individual. So individual nations or individual societies versus others, rather than individual people against others. And this leads us into our idea about inheritance. So what is inheritance? The commonly understood perception of inheritance is money or assets bequeathed or given upon or given to the descendants of one person. And we talk a lot about inheritance in a first-person view because, again, we are individuals, and we see it in the perspective of the people who are receiving the money, right? I inherited money. I inherited this. Or I'm leaving behind money for XYZ people or persons, right? And that's realistically how it really is being done today. Right? We're treating it as an individual affair in the perspective of the inheritor, because those are the people, of course, that are alive to talk about it, right? The bequeathers are not left, presumably. And this leads to a greater question: is if this is the case, if we look at it in the perspective of the inheritors, why is this unfair? Of course, it's unfair. Well, we have a right to be envious for people who just found money anywhere. That seemingly is unfair because, in the perspective of the people who get the money, it's almost like they just found, just came across a document that said they owned some massive company, or they found a pot of gold on the street at the end of a rainbow, right? Because we see it that way. But why do we see it this way? So I'd like to go on a side tangent here about how different ideologies are motivated. So currently we live in a world which is dominated and focused on power dynamics and critical theory. Whether you like it or not, I think it's extremely useful. It's just one way of thinking, right? That we should always examine things through the lenses of power, and that power should be distributed equally depending on how you view it, or which version of Marxist critical thinking that you go to. But ultimately, it says that people who come across power and wield it unfairly are immoral. And why is this? So this is because there's this general idea out there. I don't know if it's been voiced popularly, but that different ideologies are based off of different base human emotions. One is envy, which I think might be most applicable to this case, but another might be disgust, guilt, shame. All of these things apply to different societies. For example, Confucianism, which is extremely based around the structure of family and order. Shame is a big thing because you don't want to bring shame upon that which makes you a collective, that which gives you purpose, which is your family or your general community. For disgust, you might have Nazism, for example, which found a great disgust in of very many different groups of people who they saw as destructive to their own race or their own interest, and that's a very genetic evolutionary thing, right? We developed disgust to hate rats because that they had disease. We hate mosquitoes, hate urine and stuff that we just see out there because it has serious implications to our health. And these are all, these ideologies, to a certain level, at least the more recent ones, are a reflection of some of these human-based natures. Now, that's just a tangent I thought I'd go off on. There's, definitely a video out there I can make. But ultimately, currently in the modern day, we feel this sort of envy towards these people, at least in the non-elite classes, to the elites. And to get back to the point of inheritance, I believe this sort of thing is because of the loss of clan structure. So that which is yours represents that which is your lineages. That's the main understanding that I want to kind of preach in this video, which is that if you own something, it's not you as an individual. Realistically, it's the lineage you come from, your family, your community, what makes you a part of a collective. And because we're so individualistic now, which of course, as I've said, gives us so many liberties and certain freedoms, we've kind of taken away from that. So I'll bring up a statistic which says that in a recent study in 2022, out of course, it's not a big sample size, but out of 2,113 adults, there's a very big knowledge gap in recent family history. So obviously, America, you can read these statistics for yourself, but ultimately, the more scary number is that only 4% could name all 8 of their great-grandparents, or could, presumably find somewhere that it's easily available. So what's interesting is that there's a societal split between Eastern and Western cultures, where in Eastern, more communal, or not communal, but more collective cultures, there's a greater emphasis placed on family. The most extreme example would probably be Japan, but even at least for my culture, which is before my family immigrated to America, we have a book with many names and many records that we hold dearly, that has records of almost 1,000 years of family history. And this is the case for many families in East Asia. This is because it reflects the values of their culture, which is going to be the foundations of their community, which is their family, ultimately, their ancestry, right? And I think America is the most extreme example. For example, many Europeans I do know have this sort of they have the same sort of respect for family trees and such. But in America, so many of these families are heterogeneous, right? A lot of people in America aren't aware of their true roots, especially European ones, right? Of course, you have people who are, we might call pure blood, like Italians, Irish, and they have some good understanding, but people who are, your typical 15% Polish, 35% German, 50% Italian, like one of my friends, right? You're going to find that this sort of reflection isn't going to be as easy. You don't have the same loyalty to your clan structure, because not only do you not have share the same blood as everyone in your family, you might not even be in touch or have the same history or the same language even. And this creates a disconnect between the individual and their community or collective that they're actually a part of, which is their family or their lineage. And what this does is that it heavily skews the conversation to be individual based. Because ultimately, what is inheritance? It's moving from one member of a lineage to another. The wealth still stays in that lineage, right? One way to think of it is not from the individual side, but let's say you're the one trying to leave something behind. Your last transaction, your last movement, your lasting impact will be to paying your descendants. It's your last action. So it's not really a receiving action, it's a giving action. And that's how you keep thinking. It's a giving, receiving, into giving again. And that's how the cycle goes, right? Generational wealth, many people call it. And that's one way to put it into perspective why it's not really an individual issue and it's not a recipient issue. And this gets into point 4. Is money transactional? And is money and why money is more than transactions? So money is treated today as a representation of an individual's value to society. Whether you're a cashier or a multi-billion-dollar tech enthusiast, right? You're still giving value to society through your labor, innovation, or capital, right? And this is simply how money works, right? If you do things for society, you are rewarded or at least compensated with money, which allows you to command certain things in your life or command things in society, right? You're depending on what you do for society and how important it is, like being a doctor is, thousands of times more important than being a cashier, for example, at least when it comes to affecting individual human lives, you're going to be compensated greatly. And that sets the expectation that money is earned, right? Money is earned and it has to be earned. Because you're an individual, according to current societal expectations, you're an individual that contributes things to society. But this isn't really true. You have to look at it as like a more clan structure kind of thing. You're a part of the lineage. You live in the context of what came before you, which sounds similar to something I've heard. Oh, Kamala here. Well, regardless, you come from the context that you have a family that has done certain things in the past, and maybe they've had an outsized impact on society, right? So I have an example here that I actually wrote down. So an industrial tycoon who created millions and millions of jobs for their people, versus with a deadbeat son versus a peasant family where everyone works hard. You're still gonna find that the industrial tycoon had more outsized impact on society. Whether you think that's earned or not, or whether you think they exploited them or like they're industrial workers or not, the fact of the matter is, technically, that lineage with the deadbeat son still produced more societal impact, which compensated them with more money. The markets and the consumers compensated them for their outside societal impact or good, or maybe they created hundreds of millions of quilts for people cold at night, right? And this kind of represents the whole idea. It's not the deadbeat son versus the hardworking peasant farmer that deserves it. We're not individuals, ultimately. We're all, as humans, we're all part of some sort of clan. And the more we lose that, the more divisive things get. Because you live as a member of the clan you actually are part of. And the more we get away from that, the more divisive things become, because we treat everything as an individual struggle. So, a interesting idea I also want to introduce here is the unknowing inheritor or the purposeful endower. So we already discussed this in the inheritance section, but it's a matter of perspective. Do you treat it as as what's important is the person receiving or the person giving? The answer is neither, actually. So I already stressed the endower point just to have a little devil's advocate. But this model here, which if you can see on video, is two different models. So in the top model is a currently understood contemporary model where individuals give money to individuals, or many individuals, right? If you have like a big family or something, but you bequeath many things, and some people might get more things, and some people might get less things. But ultimately, in both examples here, money stays in the clan or assets, right? Everything stays within your family. Nothing's actually moving, because what's important isn't your individual contribution. It's because we're not actually individuals. We're actually part of collectives. It's what our collective family or unit has done to provide society. For the same reason why, if the peasant farmer's son, for example, becomes incredibly wealthy and starts a construction farming business, he should have all of the right in the world to bequeath that money and assets to his next son or next daughter, and then they could bestow those assets on the next one, because he has earned it. That peasant farmer's son has created something with outsized value to society, either through luck or hard work, and has therefore earned the right to make sure his next descendants are able to live comfortably. So while it is unfair, it is unjust, and life is unfair in the fact that some people aren't able to escape that cycle of inequality because they're not able to get more kickbacks, for example, and some people are simply born into it. Think about it from the perspective of the person who did all of that hard work initially and created what allows them to actually bequeath, right? Or bestow. So if someone, for example, worked hard as an immigrant and created a business which grew really, really large, they should have all the right to make sure that their future descendants and their bloodline is secure for the next 3 generations. And if you look at it like that, everyone seems to have the opportunity to become the starter of a generational wealth cycle. Of course, again, as I mentioned, the elephant in the room is that this does ensure that inequality stays rampant. But it also means that those who earn it, even from lower classes, are able to actually keep it. For example, let's say we don't want the rich to stay really rich and grow a bigger gap with the poor. But let's say every once in a while, a poor person does become really successful. Do we want to strip the money off of them? Now that's a difficult question, right? Is it about earning it, or is it about actual value? And so what does this say about future humans and what we owe to them? So that's what this whole video comes back to, because this video is about the perspective of the inheritor versus the the bestower, the giver, right? And what does this say about what we owe to making sure Earth and society and government is stable for future humans? What do we owe to the unborn children of our children, for example? What do we owe to the people who are going to eventually have to pay off all this government debt pretty soon? And this is a difficult question. Do we need to prioritize now, or do we need to make sacrifices for the future? And what does that say about what we are currently doing, and do we need to sacrifice certain things now? So many times in this channel so far in our last 2 weeks, I've discussed multiple times about how certain technological developments may already have been or may be potentially destructive in the future, especially when it comes to things that interact with the human social life, like social media, which I've stressed as a problem multiple times. So do we owe it to future humans to leave behind a society with a stable birth rate and good social interactions and norms and standards that we've been left behind? And does that mean that we need to cut back on things that maybe aren't so good in the long run? And those interests right now with long run versus short run are being severely disputed by politicians, because of course the short run is more important when it comes to being reelected. And that's what a politician wants to do. If to regulate multi-billion-dollar companies, which are obviously providing good social media services and advertising for many millions of other companies, should they be regulated or even decreased in any manner? This could mean that you lose shareholder value, you lose votes, you lose confidence in your current economic status. However, do you leave behind a better world in the future where people are less anxiety induced, better birth rates so people don't have to pay high taxes at a young age, better social standings and social standards to ensure that society functions? Because so much of what's happening today is so unnatural. It's born of non-natural order, right? We're all the damn phones, right? But it's a joke, of course. But ultimately, we have to calm down a little bit, look back, and realize that what our societal standards today, our moral standards, what we hold as important, is all not born in a vacuum. It's based on things that have been previously decided and tested throughout thousands and thousands of years of history. Why certain things are the way they are, and of course that doesn't mean we shouldn't develop for the future. It shouldn't mean we don't progress socially, but we should do it in a way that actually works. Because not all societies succeed in everything they do. A lot of times they rise and fall like the Roman Empire, and we're not destined to be successful forever. Just because we keep adding new things and changing things doesn't mean we're going to succeed. That's why we need to look at it more critically, literally critical theory, right? And see how power dynamics are currently changing the way the world works, how inequality is impacting people, how social media is changing social interactions for the long run. And we're already seeing the short-term effects of a lot of these things, especially in America, right? And it's already bad enough as it is for example, when it comes to social anxiety problems in my generation, that's Generation Z, but it's already being documented that it's even worse in Generation Alpha, who are seemingly unable to work hard, have certain expectations, and instant gratification makes them expect things immediately and that they deserve stuff without actually having to work with it. Now, it's no secret that Gen Z has many productive people who are actually able to fully embrace the benefits of internet social media without actually becoming a slave to it. But this is so few, right? There's not really an exigence for people to work, and there's not really this sort of positivity that people may have had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that dominated the 20th century as a positive era of growth, right? Just like how societies are never forever, growth is neither forever either. So we need to either find a solution, or we need to ensure that we're able to actually pay off our debt to future humans, because we do owe it to them to not suffer due to our losses. For example, utilitarianism, that's a popular ideology or philosophy that says that we should try to maximize human happiness and minimize suffering. I'm actually not sure if the ideology has pleasure or happiness, but ultimately the point is that we should minimize human suffering. And does not also apply to future humans. Does the amount of human suffering now, due to due to us implementing long-term policy, outweigh the amount of good that will create in the future, or the suffering that will minimize in the future? And that's the real question. Do we look at it as a perspective of us giving stuff to future humans, or do we have some greater understanding that the future humans need to figure things out on their own? And that's what this comes down to. Do we think that we matter more than future humans, or do we need to take the next step and ensure that the future humans do well? And this might be a more resonant issue for many, but now convert all of those terms and turn it into, do I, as a family head, have the responsibility to leave behind money for my granddaughter? And if you think about it like that, it becomes a lot easier to say that yes, in fact, inheritance is a good thing that is in the perspective of the purposeful endower, who has accrued wealth through some way, through some benefit to society, and has been compensated for that, and therefore they are able to provide services and benefits to those who think they are important. Just like how if I donate to a charity after making millions of dollars or thousands of dollars and donate even like a few $100s, I make a big impact on things I want to change. So what if? So why is it bad if someone is able to endow money on someone they want to change, which is their own bloodline? But because we don't see as an individualistic society the value in maintaining a strong lineage or bloodline, right? We're unable to see the utility in that. So this was a fun video. I was honestly running out of video ideas recently because all this stuff is burned out. My my documents burned out. But I managed to pick up this gem from one of the back pages, and really, this was a fun video to make. So if you had any thoughts, comments, concerns, questions, or critiques about anything I said here, or you want to discuss anything further, I'd be willing to have any conversation down in the comments. Only thing I don't want you to comment on is the whole, Marxism, envy, Nazism, guilt thing, because that's not been fleshed out fully. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one. Rhetoric Reviewed out.